The small town of Windale was as quiet as an old library, especially in winter, when the fog covered the pathways and the people lived more by habit than by hope. On the southern edge of town, in a rented apartment in a government housing complex, lived a woman named Emily York and her 8-year-old daughter, Karen. Karen hadn't spoken since the night everything fell apart. No one knew what had happened, and if anyone did, they chose not to say. Emily only told the therapist. She saw something a child shouldn't see. That was all. No more, no less. Karen still went to school, still did her homework, but she was completely silent. The look in her eyes made people stop breathing. Each glance seemed like a question no one dared to answer. The only friend Karen had was her dog, Toby, a rescue dog adopted from a temporary shelter. Toby was nearly 10 years old, not quick, but somehow understood things better than any human. As soon as Karen raised her hand, Toby would sit. If she tilted her head, he would walk toward her. No one had taught Toby that, and Karen had never given a command aloud. When the police first came to the house, Emily stood in front of the door, holding a cold cup of coffee. Karen sat in the corner of the room holding Toby. She didn't cry. She didn't try to avoid them. But her eyes made the older officer turn his face away after 2 minutes. 3 weeks later, they received a summons to court. A lawsuit involving Karen's stepfather, the man who had disappeared on a stormy night, leaving the house with dried blood on the stairs and a lighter lying under the bed. After receiving the summons, Emily locked all the windows at night, as though the wind could carry rumors into every crack in the wood. The town of Windale didn't like court cases, didn't like disruptions, and certainly didn't like quiet children knowing more than adults wanted to admit. Karen still didn't speak, but she started drawing. At first, just scribbles, but then shapes began to form. An old staircase, a wooden door, a faceless figure. Toby always lay next to her, his eyes wide open, as if he too were reading every pencil stroke. Emily found the drawings when she was cleaning the room. Karen didn't hide them, but she didn't reveal them either. They just lay still in the drawer, stacked like testimonies buried under a pile of paper. One day, Emily tried asking, "Is this our house?" Karen neither nodded nor shook her head. But Toby, who had been lying in the corner, suddenly stood up, walked to Emily's side, then turned back to look at Karen. One glance, one subtle nod. The only visitors were the local therapist, Mrs. Martha Helgren, a gray-haired woman who always wore gloves. She came every Tuesday, exactly at 9 in the morning, always knocked 3 times, and entered if no one answered. "Hello, Toby," she would often say first. Then she would sit next to Karen, never asking, never pressuring, just telling stories. About her grandmother, about the heavy rain in 1981, about the dress she had made herself. Karen never responded, but each time Mrs. Helgren came, Toby didn't sleep. "The child remembers more than she should," Mrs. Helgren told Emily one rainy afternoon. "And Toby is the keeper of her memories." Emily just sighed. "I'm scared, you know. I'm afraid that one day she will speak, and I don't know what will come out of her." That night, Karen wrapped an old shawl around Toby. She sat next to him for a long time, her hand resting on the dog's head. Not petting, just touching. The room was silent, with only the crackling sound of the fireplace and the wind chimes outside. Emily stood in the doorway, not entering. She could clearly see something. Toby was no longer a pet. He was the last lifeline connecting Karen to the world. The next morning, the police stopped by. They only asked a few questions, soft-spoken, but their eyes betrayed suspicion. "Has anyone else been to the house after the 15th?" the officer asked. "No," Emily replied. "The neighbors reported seeing a strange man standing in the backyard 2 nights ago." "I didn't see anyone." Karen was sitting at the drawing table when she heard the words "strange man." Her hand froze. The pencil dropped to the floor. Toby let out a soft whine, stretching toward her. Karen reached out, folded the page and put it in the drawer. The officer didn't notice. But Emily did. And that night, she found the drawing. A man standing in the rain outside the kitchen window. There was a red stain on his shirt. And in his hand, a lighter. A week before the court hearing, Karen started practicing writing with her left hand. No one asked. No one taught her. Emily discovered it when she found the notebook Karen had hidden under the bed. Each line written slanting, uneven, but clearly an attempt to mimic another handwriting style. "Why?" Emily asked. Karen didn't respond. But Toby once again stood between them, like a gatekeeper for things not yet ready to come out. Before the court hearing, Karen only slept an hour and a half. Emily heard a noise around 3 in the morning. When she entered the room, she saw Karen sitting by the window, Toby lying at her feet. The curtain was pulled aside, and the moonlight shone on the drawing table. On it was a new drawing. A room. Light coming through a crack in the door, and Toby standing before a man. That man had no eyes. "What is this, sweetie?" Emily asked. Karen looked at her for the first time in 3 weeks. No smile, no tears, just a look. And for a brief moment, Emily had the feeling. It wasn't her daughter answering. It was Toby. Through that gaze. The next morning, Karen brought a small backpack. Emily intended to check it, but then she didn't. She just took Toby with her. They arrived at the courthouse early. The lawyer showed Karen how to sit, how to communicate if needed, how to ask to leave the room if she felt uncomfortable. Karen nodded. She didn't speak. When they entered the courtroom, Karen sat in the witness chair. Toby lay at her feet. Everyone in the room looked at her. The judge entered. The plaintiff began reading the charges. Then came the questioning of witnesses. The first to stand was the officer who had come to Karen's house. He detailed, that night, the house showed signs of being disturbed, no signs of forced entry, no third party. But little Karen, the only child present that night, didn't say a word. "We believe the child doesn't know anything," the defense attorney objected. The court allowed the questioning to continue. When it was Karen's turn, the investigator sat down and held out a photo in front of her. "Did you see this person that night?" Karen looked at the photo. Then she looked at Toby. She raised her left hand, gently touched Toby's head. 3 times, evenly. The dog looked up, then walked forward, facing the photo. It let out a soft growl, not a bark, not a howl, just a low, steady sound. Then it turned back and lay down at Karen's feet. The entire room went silent. The judge asked, "What is that signal?" Emily jumped up. She trained Toby with hand gestures. 3 taps on the head means unsafe. The investigator looked at Karen. "Can you confirm this?" Karen looked at him. For the first time since the beginning of the session, she nodded, slowly, decisively, without speaking. But it was enough. The judge fell silent. Karen didn't need to say a word. Toby and her signals had done the talking for her. The Windale District Court, an old red brick building, stood quietly in the heart of the town. Inside, the air felt heavy, as if every sound was sucked into the thick walls. Karen sat on the witness stand, her eyes wide open but hollow. Toby lay at her feet, his ears perked, alert. The plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Mitchell, stood up, moved closer to Karen, and gently asked, "Karen, can you tell the court what happened that night?" However, Karen didn't respond. She only lowered her head, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. Mr. Mitchell sighed, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the child is not ready to speak. However, we have evidence suggesting the presence of her stepfather at the scene. He presented a lighter, placed carefully in a plastic bag. This lighter was found under the bed. It has Mr. Richard's fingerprints on it, Karen's stepfather. The judge nodded, taking notes. The defense attorney, Mrs. Thompson, stood up to counter. Your Honor, finding the lighter doesn't prove anything. Mr. Richard lived in that house. It's normal for his fingerprints to be on objects around there. She turned to Karen, asking, Karen, do you remember who hurt you? Was it your stepfather? Karen looked up, her gaze empty. She didn't say anything, but Toby began to whimper. A low, drawn-out sound. Mrs. Thompson furrowed her brow and asked, Can you tell us somehow? Is Toby reacting to something? Karen placed her hand on Toby's head, gently stroking him. The dog looked up, staring directly at Mrs. Thompson, then turned to look at Karen. The judge intervened. It seems Toby is reacting to Karen's emotions. We'll need more time for the child to share. And the trial was adjourned for a break. After the trial, Emily took Karen home. The child remained silent, but there was something different in her eyes now, as though something had shifted inside her. That night, Karen took out a new drawing. In it was an image of a man standing in the rain, his face blurred, and Toby growling in front of him. Emily looked at the drawing, her heart heavy. Sweetheart, who is this? Karen didn't answer, but she placed her hand on Toby's head, then pointed to the man in the drawing. Emily understood. The next day, Emily met with Detective Harris and handed him the drawing. Karen drew this. I think it means something. Harris looked at the drawing, then back at Emily. We'll look into it further. Thank you, he said, then left to continue his work. The trial continued the next morning. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Karen sat again in the witness chair, her gaze still empty but deep, as if holding a silent storm within her. Toby lay at her feet, ears perked, alert. Mr. Mitchell stood again, moving toward Karen, asking once more, Karen, can you tell the court what happened that night? The child didn't react. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor, as if avoiding every question. Mrs. Thompson spoke up again, this time emphasizing the ambiguity of the evidence. But the tension in the room couldn't deny that, though Karen said nothing, Toby's reactions and the clues in the drawing the child had made might be vital pieces of the puzzle. After the trial, Emily again took Karen home. The child was still silent, but it seemed that emotions were stirring within her. That night, Karen drew again. Her pictures seemed to be slowly revealing an untold story, and Emily felt that deeply. On Friday morning, the light rain in Boston left droplets on the windows like eyes wide open, gazing down at the world with silence and scrutiny. Inside Detective Harris's office, Karen's drawing was neatly placed on the desk, beside a thick file of case documents. Harris sat still for a long time, the fatigue evident on his face, the kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing too much, yet never enough to get used to it. He turned to his subordinate and ordered, "Call for the image analysis team. I want to confirm if the coat in the drawing really belongs to Richard." After his subordinate left, Harris stood up and walked to the filing cabinet. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out an older file on Richard Turner, Karen's stepfather. Something about this file always made Harris uneasy, not because of a lack of evidence, but because everything seemed too neat, as if someone had orchestrated his disappearance. At the foster home, Karen sat on her bed, holding Toby, whispering softly but not forming words. Emily stood outside the door, watching. Although Karen remained silent, her behavior suggested that Toby wasn't just her friend. He was the only thing left that made Karen feel like she wasn't completely abandoned. That night, Emily woke up to the sound of Toby scratching at the door. She turned on the light and stepped out, noticing that Toby wasn't looking at her, but at Karen, who sat on the floor, drenched in sweat, eyes wide open but not crying. She trembled with every sharp breath. A nightmare. Emily walked over, sat next to Karen, not asking or saying anything, just gently touching her hair. After a moment, Karen turned her head and nestled into her. For the first time, Toby lay down beside her, nudging his nose into Karen's palm as if putting an end to the nightmare. 2 days later, Detective Harris returned with an envelope. He asked to speak to Karen privately. Emily hesitated, then agreed. Harris entered the room, gently opened the envelope, and took out an old photograph. Richard Turner standing next to a blonde woman in front of a log cabin by the lake. In the photo was a dog. Not Toby, but very much alike. Harris turned the photo over and read the scrawled handwriting. "If anything happens, don't let it near the child." Karen stared at the photo for a long time before suddenly standing up and walking to a small cabinet where she kept her toys. She pulled out an old, rusted metal box. Emily stepped forward to stop her, but Harris raised a hand for silence. Karen opened the box, revealing a crumpled piece of paper, folded into quarters. On the rainy night, he wore wet shoes, the smell of smoke and footsteps walking against the flow. Just one line, but it sent a chill down Harris's spine. "Did you write this?" he asked, and Karen nodded for the first time throughout the investigation. That night, as Emily was making tea, Karen came into the kitchen, holding Toby. "Emily," Karen spoke, her voice hoarse. Emily froze, knelt down, and took Karen's hand. "You can speak now." Karen didn't respond, but she walked over to the calendar on the wall and pointed to March 17, the day Richard disappeared. "That's the day he came back," she said, "not to stay, but to take what he thought was his." Emily felt her legs go weak. Across town, Detective Harris sat in his car, playing the recording of Karen's words. He closed his eyes, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the steering wheel. There was something he hadn't shared with anyone. While reviewing the crime scene, he'd noticed a dog's paw print outside Karen's window, but when compared to Toby's paw, it didn't match. The print was larger, and the arrangement uneven. It was as if something had been waiting there, all night long in the rain, watching. That evening, Emily called Karen into the backyard. She brought a small flashlight, a blanket, and 2 cups of hot cocoa. Toby followed closely, silently like a shadow. On the wet grass, Emily spread the blanket and pointed for Karen to sit down. She didn't say much, just told a simple story about the winters in Vermont, where she grew up, where the snow was so thick they had to shovel their way out of the house. Karen didn't respond, but when Emily laughed at the sound of her own voice, Karen slightly pursed her lips, the first sign of a reaction she hadn't shown in a long time. "I don't know exactly what happened to you," Emily said, "but one thing I'm sure of, you're not alone." At that moment, Toby rested his head on Karen's lap. Her hand gently stroked his ear, caressing it softly. There were no tears, but Emily's throat tightened. In the silence, something was being mended. Not the memories, not trust, but a thin thread connecting a person to a world no longer trustworthy. And Toby was the quiet needle. 2 days later, Harris returned. This time, he brought a copy of Richard Turner's record from Seattle, where the man had been investigated for charges of abusing minors, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. Harris didn't show the document to Karen or Emily. He knocked on the door and sat in the living room with Emily and the center's director, laying the file out and stating clearly, "If this is true, the child is surviving, not just physically." Emily froze. The director, Linda, furrowed her brow. "If we delve into the past without consent, is that legally right?" Harris nodded. "We won't ask the child. I think we should let the dog ask." That Tuesday night, Harris was allowed to take Karen to a special training facility for the police, where Toby had been trained by a psychological support unit. No one forced Karen to say anything. But in the room, they played an old recording of Richard, not to use as testimony, just to observe reactions. Toby perked his ears, growling softly. Karen didn't react, but when the sound stopped, she turned to Harris and whispered, "I heard him say that day." Emily gasped. Harris didn't blink. "What did he say?" he asked. Karen looked down. Toby licked her palm. "If you talk, I'll do to you what I did to your mother." The room froze. A week later, Harris obtained a search warrant for the old log cabin by the lake, where Richard had lived with Karen's mother. The house was now abandoned, with broken bricks and grass growing over the roof. In the basement, they found a wooden box buried beneath cracked cement. Inside were old items: a photo of Karen when she was 4, a doll with a broken arm, and a leather-bound notebook. Inside the notebook was Karen's mother's journal, each line a haunting piece of evidence. "He didn't just hit me. He waited until nightfall to whisper disgusting things into the child's ear. I don't know what to do." Harris gripped the notebook tightly. He knew this was no longer an investigation. This was redemption. That evening, Emily sat with Karen. No questions, no explanations. She placed the small notebook in front of the child, not opening it, just leaving it there. Karen looked at it. She didn't touch it. "Toby will stay here," Emily said. Karen nodded. In the darkness, Toby lifted his head, never taking his eyes off his owner, and when the sun rose the next morning, Karen opened the notebook. The first page had a scrawled note: "If you can read this, it means your mother is still somewhere, with you." Karen burst into tears. Toby curled up into her arms. Emily stood silently outside the door. On Thursday morning, the court in Windale County was cloaked in the soft, steady drizzle that Seattle knows all too well. Outside, the sound of car horns echoed through the faded brick layers of the King County neighborhood. Karen sat in the waiting room beside her guardian lawyer, her hair falling loosely to cover one side of her face. She didn't say a word. Her hand remained tightly clutching the leash of Daisy, the dog still under debate about whether it should be allowed in the courtroom. Lawyer Doreen took off her glasses, looking at Karen. "Are you sure you don't want to say anything today? The judge would really like to hear from you, at least just one word." Karen shook her head, but she didn't withdraw. She wasn't afraid. She just didn't speak. Daisy raised her head from the floor, licking Karen's hand gently. Karen responded with a small nod. Doreen wasn't sure what that meant. In the courtroom, the gallery wasn't crowded. A few people from the Social Services Department, a representative from the Child Protection Agency, and strangely, an older woman in a worn leather jacket sitting quietly in the back row. No one knew who she was. When the trial began, Judge Dalton, a man in his 60s, with a gaze that wasn't easily swayed, looked over the case file one last time. Karen McGill, 8 years old. Mother deceased in 2021, under the guardianship of stepfather Raymond Cobb until his disappearance last May. He paused, his gaze resting on the unverified suspect section. The child is currently silent. No witnesses have been able to confirm what happened that night, except for one action recorded by a security camera: a sudden hug from the dog Daisy at 2:17 a.m. At this point, Daisy had been allowed into the courtroom, sitting quietly beside Karen, almost an extension of her. Lawyer Doreen stood up. "Your Honor, we're not trying to accuse anyone today, but Karen needs to be in a safe place, and if she can't speak, perhaps something else is speaking for her." Judge Dalton furrowed his brow. "You mean the dog?" "No, Your Honor. I mean the behavior and the unspoken memory." Midway through, a video clip was played. It was from a neighborhood security camera, the image of a man stumbling out of the house in the middle of the night, unsteady on his feet, holding something shiny, a lighter. Then Daisy ran out of the house chasing after him. No one knew why. But when the dog returned, the man had disappeared. No body, no calls, no clues. Karen remained silent until Daisy stretched and sat up straight, and Karen, almost as if pulled along by Daisy's movement, leaned down and placed her hand on the dog's back. She closed her eyes for a moment, then did something no one expected. Karen raised her right hand, curled 3 fingers slightly, and placed that hand on Daisy's neck, a movement that looked almost like a command. Daisy immediately stood up, walked to the center of the room, and sat in front of the judge. No barking, no growling, just sitting, eyes wide open, unblinking. The courtroom went silent. No one understood. Then Judge Dalton looked at Doreen. "What is this?" "It's an emergency training signal," Doreen explained. "We checked with a service animal training facility. Only a special group of abused children are taught to use that signal, to replace a cry for help." Dalton leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed tightly together. He looked at Karen, then at Daisy. Finally, he banged his gavel. "The court orders a reopening of the investigation into the disappearance of Raymond Cobb and requests that the Child Protection Agency establish an independent guardianship file for Karen McGill, with the right to retain ownership of Daisy." Karen didn't react, but Daisy turned, walked back to Karen, and sat down beside her. Close. No need for comfort, just understanding. As they left the courtroom, the woman in the worn leather jacket from the back row approached. She said nothing. She just handed Doreen an envelope. Inside was an old photo, a blonde girl sitting next to a large dog, strikingly similar to Daisy. Below the photo, a handwritten note. "If we cannot speak, let loyalty speak for us." Doreen looked around, but the woman had vanished into the crowd. Karen held Daisy's hand and stepped out through the heavy wooden door. The light outside was dim, but the girl's eyes never blinked. She didn't need to say a word, because in the end, Daisy had spoken for her. The Westbridge County Courthouse smelled of old rain and damp bricks that Friday morning. Light filtered through tall windows, casting mottled streaks across the gray stone floor. Karen sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, shoulders hunched. Max sat beside her, the leash slack on the floor, unmoving. His eyes stared ahead, like he was watching something that no one else could see. The elderly judge entered, gavel in hand, and the trial began. This was the final hearing regarding the case of Karen's missing stepfather, the man who disappeared during a stormy night, leaving behind bloodstains on the stairs and a lighter fallen at the foot of the bed. No body was found. No confessions. But today, Karen was called to clarify one thing. Did she know what happened that night? Karen didn't speak. From the beginning to the end, she never opened her mouth during any of the sessions. She wasn't mute, but as the lawyer had put it, she chose silence for the sake of mental safety. The prosecution presented its case, calling witnesses and repeating the evidence. Nothing new. Until a young lawyer stood up, holding a device, a video extracted from an old security camera, the one placed across from the stairs in Karen's house. The screen flickered to life. The footage was blurry. Heavy rain fell. A shadowy figure staggered down the stairs, grasping the railing. He stopped. Then, from the left side of the frame, Max appeared. The dog moved slowly, neither rushing nor barking. It stood in front of the man, staring directly at him. And then, Karen, from the doorframe, raised her hand, a very small gesture, close, then open. Close, then open, 3 times. Immediately after, the man stepped back, slipped, lost his footing, and tumbled down a step. The image blurred. There was no sound, no scream, because there was no audio. The lawyer paused the video. The courtroom fell silent. The judge narrowed his eyes. "What is this signal?" he asked. The lawyer turned to Karen. "We believe this is a signal between the child and the dog, a command. The judge looked over at Karen. "Do you want to confirm this?" Karen looked at him, her eyes unblinking. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Close. Open. Close. Open. 3 times. Max stood up. No barking, no charging forward. But his gaze shifted, no longer the look of a trained animal, but the gaze of a guard, a living witness. Karen didn't need to say anything, and for a moment, the judge didn't know what to ask next. Outside the courtroom, the rain returned, light but steady. People dispersed. Karen stayed on the steps, Max leaning against her leg. The lawyer approached, speaking softly. "The trial is over. No one was charged, but you know they won't stop trying to ask more questions." Karen didn't answer. She simply placed her hand on Max's head, gently stroking it. The dog looked up, licked her hand, then turned its head toward the parking lot. The wind blew, not strongly, but coldly, as if something had just left this space. Karen stood up and walked away. Max followed, 3 steps behind. As usual. After the trial, Karen was taken to a temporary children's care center. The small room, with pale blue walls, had a window overlooking a garden. Karen sat on the bed, her gaze quietly directed outside. Max lay beside her, his head resting against her leg. Days passed, and Karen remained silent. But she began to draw, pencil sketches depicting the old house, the stairs, the lighter, and a faceless figure. In each drawing, Max was always present, standing between Karen and the figure. One afternoon, a social worker named Emily came to visit. She brought along a watercolor set and encouraged Karen to try using it. Karen remained silent, but after a while, she started to add color to her drawings, red for the bloodstains, yellow for the light from the lighter, and gray for the figure. Emily noticed that, through these drawings, Karen was telling her story. She decided to show the drawings to Detective Harris. After reviewing them, Harris realized the details in the drawings matched the crime scene. He decided to reopen the investigation, this time focusing on the details Karen had drawn. He returned to the old house, following the clues from the drawings. In a hidden corner beneath the stairs, he found a small blood stain that no one had noticed before. Nearby, he discovered a small piece of fabric, likely from the stepfather's shirt. Harris sent the fabric for DNA testing. The result confirmed it was Richard Turner's blood, Karen's stepfather. This proved he had been injured in the house before he disappeared. Meanwhile, Karen kept drawing. A new picture appeared. Max standing in front of an open door, with darkness beyond it. Karen stood behind, her hand on Max's back. This picture made Emily think deeply. She asked Karen, "Where does that door lead?" Karen looked at her, then pointed at the drawing, then at her heart. Emily understood. The door symbolized the fear and painful memories Karen was trying to face. With Emily's support and Max by her side, Karen gradually opened up. She started speaking in short sentences, sharing her feelings. Each time she spoke, Max wagged his tail, as if encouraging her. Finally, Karen told the story of that night. Richard had been drinking and became violent. He threatened Karen, but Max intervened. During the struggle, Richard fell down the stairs and was badly injured. In fear, he fled into the stormy night and never returned. Karen's testimony, combined with the new evidence, helped close the case. Karen was placed in a new adoptive family where she could start a new life. Max stayed with her as a loyal friend and protector. Karen's story is a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and timely support. Despite the deep wounds she endured, she found light in the darkness with the help of those around her and her faithful dog. Karen stood up and walked away, Max following closely behind, 3 steps back, just like always. Outside the courthouse, the rain continued to fall gently, scattering across the pavement. Each step Karen took seemed heavy with unspoken thoughts, while Max quietly trailed behind, his watchful gaze still gentle. They turned into a narrow alley where the dim streetlights failed to push back the darkness. An old wooden door appeared before them. Karen paused, her hand trembling as she gently knocked. The door opened, revealing the familiar face of Emily, the social worker who had been with Karen through it all. Emily looked surprised and worried when she saw Karen. She asked, "Karen, what are you doing here at this hour?" But Karen didn't answer. She just bent down to stroke Max's back, then looked up, meeting Emily's gaze, and spoke quietly but firmly. "I need to talk." This was the first time Karen had spoken voluntarily since the trial. Emily stepped back and opened the door wider, inviting Karen in. Inside, the room was warm, the soft yellow light glowing. Karen sat down on the couch, Max lying beside her, his head resting on her lap, while Emily sat across from them, waiting. Karen began to recount her past. "I remember now. That night, he came back." Emily encouraged her to continue. Karen spoke of what had happened. He had been drunk, angry, and Karen's mother had tried to protect her, but he had pushed her mother down. Max had lunged at him, biting him, which caused him to flee. Karen's voice caught in her throat, her eyes filled with tears. Max gently licked Karen's hand, as if to comfort her. Karen shared that she had kept silent out of fear, but now she didn't want to be afraid anymore. Emily gently squeezed Karen's hand, telling her that she was very brave and had done the right thing. Karen nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and Max nestled closer to her, as if sharing the pain and the relief. In the days that followed, Karen continued to open up to Emily about her past. She began to draw the scenes from her memories, emotional and detailed pictures. One of the drawings caught Emily's attention, an open door with darkness beyond it, and Max standing in front of Karen, his gaze unwavering. When Emily asked about the drawing, Karen explained that it represented the time he came back and how Max protected her. Emily smiled, her eyes filled with emotion, and said that Max was a wonderful friend. Karen nodded, gently petting Max, and said she didn't know what she would have done without him. As time passed, Karen slowly healed. She returned to school, made new friends, and participated in extracurricular activities, with Max always by her side, like a loyal companion and silent protector. One day, Karen received a letter from the courthouse, notifying her that the case of her stepfather had been closed. He was officially declared missing and no longer a threat. Karen looked at Max, a light smile appearing on her face, and said, "We're free now." Max wagged his tail, his eyes shining with joy. Karen's story is a testament to the power of courage, love, and timely support. Despite the deep wounds she had endured, the young girl found light in the darkness with the help of those around her and her faithful dog. Appreciate you staying with us. Not everyone gets to hear the untold. If this intrigued you, drop a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to The Untold Story to uncover even more.